Hello, and thank you for joining me today. Welcome to the EPA-Tribal Environmental Plan ETEP online training series module number 1. I'm Joshua Simmons, and I'm going to share a little bit more of my background in a few moments, but I really appreciate you joining me today. So I want to provide this disclaimer just to make sure that it's clear that this is being offered by Prosper Sustainably, and this workshop, this webinar, this full series is not sponsored and endorsed by the US EPA and shouldn't be considered a representation of their opinions in any way. I want to start by sharing some of the ETEP online training series goals, and these are for the whole training series. So this is kind of the before and after of. So before taking this training series, you may feel like I have to prepare an ETEP because the EPA says so. And I know I can understand that position. I've been in that position myself as a former tribal environmental director, of being required to do some things that just didn't, I it's frustrating because, I'm kind of got to get our work done. We got to continue to move things forward. And then we just get these new requirements that just don't fully make sense to us. But after taking this training, my goal is that your perspective will be that I want to prepare an ETEP because it will make understanding, tracking, and achieving our goals so much easier. So the perspective shifts from I had to prepare an ETEP to I actually want to prepare an ETEP because it actually makes my life easier. So before, you may be thinking or saying to yourself, now that we've completed an ETEP, or without this training, now that we've completed our ETEP, we can get back to our real work. And that just kind of goes back to being required to do something that you don't necessarily kind of understand the point of. It just seems like more developing another plan. So in going through this training, I believe that your perspective will be that we use our ETEP almost every day, and I really do not know how we ever functioned without it. That your ETEP is really critical to the functioning of your department and your office. So before, you may have thought that before this training, you may be thinking that our department's purpose, goals, and decision-making processes are unclear. And then through this training, and if you are following through this process, I believe that you will be saying that everyone understands and is invested in our department's purpose, goals, and decision-making processes. All right, so before going through this ETEP online training series, you may be afraid of turnover or people leaving, or leaving yourself perhaps, because it'll be like starting from scratch. And being a former director of a tribal environmental program myself, I excuse me, experienced some of this myself, where excuse me, I was, I helped develop this program essentially from scratch, and was really hesitant to leave. I mean, if you are happy with your job, obviously you want to stay there forever, but life happens, your career happens, it evolves. But you want to feel like you can leave and not feel like everything is going to fall apart or restart, or everything you've done essentially is possibly going to go by the wayside. So with an ETEP that I'm going to help you to design through this course, I hope that you will be saying that if we lose anybody, we still can stay on track because of our ETEP. And also because of our ETEP, people are more likely to want to stay because they are on board, they understand, and they're invested. So before taking this training course, you may be feeling that developing an ETEP seems overwhelming and I'm not sure how to start. And after the training course, I hope that your perspective is that the whole process of developing an ETEP was clear, simple, and easy to follow. So for me, an ETEP really is a simplified and adaptable strategic planning and management system. So the caveat here is that this is based on the approach that I've developed for preparing an ETEP, preparing and utilizing an ETEP. I'm not saying that all ETEPs are going to be this or result in this, but this is the approach that I've taken, and this is what I believe the potential is if it's done in an effective manner, which I'm going to go through. So the agenda for this module is I'm going to start off with an orientation and instruction. So I provided some of these before we had started. If you have any questions, you have the GoToWebinar sidebar, which has an area where you can enter your questions. So there should be a tab there. You can enter questions and comments. Throughout the webinar, I'm going to periodically check these questions and answer those between segments. So I'm going to try not to get distracted. You also can raise your hand if you have a series of questions and I feel like perhaps it'd be better to have a little bit of discussion about it. I may open it up at that point. Otherwise, I'm going to try to just keep those to typed questions and comments until the very end. At the very end, I am going to open up the audio so that people could raise their hands and answer questions. And I'll provide instructions at that time. As I mentioned, if you're having video or audio issues, try closing out any programs that you may be running, especially any other programs that you may be running. Keep the GoToWebinar application running. But anything that's using the internet, that may be slowing down your audio or video speed. And if you're having audio issues, another thing too is try calling in rather than streaming it over the internet, because that'll take up bandwidth, and that may help you get better audio as well. Also, there's going to be activities throughout this workshop or the particular module. So I recommend that you have a notepad or document ready so that you can take notes and follow along and complete some of the activities as you're going through. So I intend to have the people who are participating get started on their ETEP. And even for those who have gone through their ETEP and have a draft or completed ETEP, these processes will be helpful for you, especially if you want to convert it into the ETEP format that I have developed. And let me just show you that right now as well, so that you can kind of see where we're going with all this. So just give me a moment and let me show you the ETEP strategic work plan that I have developed when working with my clients on this. So the goal is really to have an ETEP that's a functional ETEP that has all of your programs, your goals and objectives all in one place. It's very easy to filter and sort. And it's not a standard Word document. I am going to provide an option where you can put this into a Word document as well. Not all of this information, but all the essential information that's required, and that a Word document that can be more readily updated. But this is meant to be something that you're going to use possibly on a daily basis. This is going to guide your decision making, your management processes. It's going to help you connect and communicate with others, and it's going to provide everything the EPA requires. But so obviously I'm trying to make sure that we're meeting the EPA requirements, but also I want to make sure that this is something that is going to be extremely valuable to you, where going back to those goals, that you can't remember how you survived without it. So this is the ETEP strategic work plan. There's other components to the ETEP, and then one thing that I recommend as well is this isn't necessarily an EPA requirement, but is that you link it to a strategic plan. And this is really kind of a brief thing that shows your mission, vision, values, your long-term goals, and in this case the template itself is only a single-page document. You fill this in. This provides some overarching direction, and then your ETEP strategic work plan actually flows down from it. So your ETEP, the Tribal Environmental Plan portion of it is actually a strategic work plan. And we're going to go all into all. I'm going to walk through the very process of filling all these things out throughout the course of this training series. All right, so I'm going to go through just kind of instructor introduction, because this is the very first one. I'll provide, introduce myself, provide a little background and experience. I'm going to do a course overview. After that, I'm going to get into the full course overview, and then also course resources and logistics, and these are going to be more applicable to those doing the full training course. Then I'm going to go through, review the requirements, components, and processes for developing an ETEP. And this is an overlap of a lot of the webinars and presentations I've done in the past, and also what the EPA has been sharing with tribes as well. So I'm going to keep this as brief as possible. I'm going to go through this more briefly than I have in the past, but I am going to add some additional kind of exercises and considerations that I have not talked about before in that. And then we're going to get started in the scoping and information gathering processes for developing your ETEP. So, we're going to dive right in, and then at the very end, I'm going to go through the next steps of where the training series is going to go from here, what the assignments are, and then I ask that everybody participating complete the survey. So the survey will pop up after the course, after I exit the course, and there'll be an email reminder, I believe, that's going to be sent out a day after in case you don't get a chance to fill it out right then. But I really do appreciate your feedback. It helps me improve, and if it also, you can let me know whether you have any interest in anything else, or possibly participating in the full training series if you are not currently registered. All right, so I do want to preview right now some of the activities and assignments we're going to go through so you can see some of what we're going to accomplish today. I'm going to have you consider and start to determine the core team for developing your ETEP, and also identifying who are the other relevant stakeholders and how you may approach working with them. You're going to consider the scope of your ETEP, including identifying your possible priority program areas. So what programs, what departments, what personnel is your ETEP actually going to involve? Very important to consider from the beginning, especially when you're starting the process of doing your information gathering. So you first need to determine the scope of the ETEP, and then from there you can go out and gather the relevant information. I'm going to get you started in that. So that actually gets you started with some assignments, and I'm hoping that you're going to have a lot of information gathering completed by the time we start the next module. We're going to review the GAP Guidance Appendix 1. So we're going to talk about some of that today and give you a little bit of time to do that during the module, but that's going to be an activity to be conducted in between to go through the full guidance through all of the program areas the EPA has in the GAP guidance documents, and all of what I'm calling intermediate objectives, but are really capacity indicators. And this is going to be very helpful in identifying program areas and objectives for your ETEP. I'm also going to ask you to consider and develop 2 to 3 examples of the flow of program area to goal to objectives. And this is important that you understand how this works and what this is, because this is how the ETEP strategic work plan as a strategic management system works. You need to understand the distinction between the program areas, the goals and objectives, and how they flow and how they relate to one another so that you can manage those on an ongoing basis. And for those that are going to be continuing on in the series, I'm going to review and provide some feedback on those. All right, so my name is Josh Simmons, and there's a picture of me. It's a couple years old, but I still essentially look the same. Maybe beard is a little bit fluffier, maybe I have a few more wrinkles now, but I'm the founding president of Prosper Sustainably, a business that I started about 2 years ago. And I work with individuals, organizations, and tribes on lasting solutions to meet environmental and sustainability needs. So in addition to ETEP development, I do strategic planning, grant writing, program development, code drafting, developing plans, feasibility studies, project management, so on and so forth. Prior to starting this business, I was the director of the Santa Ynez Chumash Environmental Office located in Santa Barbara County, California. Did that for about 7 years, had a lot of success there. And I've also been involved in providing trainings on various topics, the primary ones being ETEPs, grant writing, and drafting codes. And I've been doing that for a variety of organizations, including ITEP. And actually, there's going to be another training I'm working on ITEP with coming up in April, developing an integrated solid waste management plan. So if you're on my email list, well, actually everybody who's registered will be on the email list if you're not already, so you don't need to request that. You will receive notification of that, and ITEP is going to actually, it's going to be a free 3-day training, and it's going to provide travel financial assistance as well. So some of my ETEP experience, some direct consulting projects. So far I've worked with 4 tribes on developing their ETEPs, and all these tribal program directors and personnel have seemed to be pretty happy with the products that they developed, and so I encourage you to reach out to anybody from these programs if you want to learn about their experience with this particular approach. And I definitely stand behind it. And as I mentioned, I've been doing ETEP trainings. I've done half-day and full-day workshops. Last fall, I've done some presentations at the Region 9 annual conference sessions, and I provided a series of webinars as well. The past webinars that I've done are posted on my website, and you can watch the videos and see the presentations. This particular one is not going to be posted online because this is part of a training series for which you either need to be a past client or a paid trainee, but there'll be something else that you are going to get from it. And then other consulting experience as well that I won't go into detail on. All right, so here's a full overview of the course. So Module 1, which we're talking about today, is going to be, the introduction overview, focus really on making sure you understand what this is all about, what you're required to do in as brief as manner as possible, and the initial scoping and information gathering, which is really critical to get started. It's going to be lots of assignments and activities. You're going to have plenty of work to do between now and the next module to get yourself up and running, but it'll be worthwhile. So Module 2 is going to be focusing on conducting a baseline needs assessment. So this may be a formal baseline needs assessment that you prepare. Really, as part of the ETEP process, you need to conduct at least an informal baseline needs assessment process. You can't identify and establish your goals and objectives without identifying what your needs are, where you're at right now. So we're going to go through the processes of doing that, and that's really related to the information kind of gathering and organizing. During Module 2, we're going to take that information that's been gathered and the baseline needs assessment that's being conducted and really start identifying and selecting the priority program areas, long-term goals, and intermediate milestones / objectives. I'm going to explain what each of those are in today's module. So the time and the order of these topics is subject to change depending on how quickly we get through stuff as well, but I will make sure everything is covered in detail, and then there may be some overlap here and there, or I may start to discuss some of Module 2 stuff in today's module and vice versa. All right, Module 3, we're then going to be preparing a living adaptable ETEP strategic work plan, which is really the primary instrument of it. I really would say that 90–95% of this effort should be focused on this, and this is really the document that's going to, I believe, kind of revolutionize your office and help you evolve into and stand track with where you want, identify and stand track with where you want to go. And that's going to incorporate those program areas, those goals, the intermediate milestones / objectives. It's also going to include all the other requirements that the EPA has for the tribes portion of the ETEP, which is the time frame, the roles, capacity indicators, resources, so on and so forth. Module 4, we're going to discuss I'm going to walk you through the process of developing an overarching and complementary strategic plan so that you are going to develop your mission, vision, values, goals, and objectives, and even conducting a SWOT analysis, which is going to guide your ETEP. So, I'm actually, ideally you would have some of this ahead of time, and some of you may, so this might give you an opportunity to revise, relook at it and revise it, which I think is, something you should be doing on an ongoing basis. Ideally you would do this before you do the ETEP, but I really, when I'm doing strategic planning, I actually like to get into the meat of things. So I like to consider goals and objectives in program areas before considering my overall overarching mission and vision, just because I feel like I'm more informed about what my vision is after I've reflected upon what my potential goals and objectives are. In Module 5 is actually going to be a 60-minute question and answer session. So you're going to have participants will have an opportunity to go through and ask all sorts of questions. I'm going to send emails in between asking to prepare questions. So throughout this is going to be prompts to do the assignments, to do the activities, to provide questions, and so that there can be some free-flowing discussion, and you can hear from other people that are participating as well. So what's been their experience with their ETEP so far? What are the challenges that they're running into? What are some of the ideas that they have? So this is kind of a collective thing. I obviously have a certain amount of expertise and knowledge around this topic, but I'm open to suggestions and other ideas and information. And so I want to make sure that we're pooling that knowledge and those ideas together. Module 6 is going to be preparing and finalizing your complete ETEP, and we're then going to dive into the other documents that are going to be a part of the ETEP, which is going to include your inventory of regulated entities. It's also going to include the EPA's priorities, roles, and responsibilities. There'll need to be both tribal leadership and EPA review and approval, or at least some form of tribal approval of this document, and we're going to get into exactly what that can entail. I'm going to give you some examples of what I've seen out there and how to approach these. Module 7 is going to focus on utilizing, reviewing, and updating your ETEP and strategic plan. So how do we transform this into a strategic management system that is really not just critical to everyday operations, but helps guide everything? It really, as a director, as program managers, as decision makers, this is going to really help you in those processes. It's going to streamline all these things. It's going to keep everything in proper perspective. It's going to create less work. It's going to help you pursue your goals more efficiently and more effectively, make you less reactive out there kind of, fighting fires all the time. So, I mentioned decision-making processes, managing your staff time and objectives, preparing your gap work plans and other grant work plans. And I've already seen some success from some people I've worked with or who have utilized my approach in doing this, who have found that preparing their gap work plan was actually so much easier when they had this ETEP strategic work plan. And then kind of the annual review and update, because your ETEP is only as valuable as the latest updates that you have in it. And making sure you're doing this at least once a year. You may choose to do this more frequently, but making sure it's current, because your circumstances are changing, and you're going to put put a certain amount of effort into developing this initially, and then you're just fine-tuning it. You're just updating it on a periodic basis. It's going to take a lot less effort, and it's going to make sure that you're staying on track. And then Module 8 is going to be another question and answer session. It may include some additional, I may extend that, might be more like 90 minutes if there needs to be more of Module 7 topics covered as well. So the full training course is going to be 8 modules. It's going to, I believe, be 11 hours, at least 11 hours total. So most of the primary modules are going to be 90 minutes, just like this one, and the Q&A sessions are slated to be 60 minutes. Okay, so the course resources and logistics are more applicable to those who are participating in this course on an ongoing basis in the rest of the training series. So for scheduling, I'm going to be sending out doodle polls, so please respond to those. I'm going to try to get the best times that work for everybody, but webinar modules are going to be recorded and will be available as on-demand videos. So just as a note, this is only an option for those who are participating. I'm not actually providing the on-demand videos for this particular webinar. It's for the past clients and the paid registrants, just to kind of respect the money they've invested and also the time and effort that I've invested in developing this as well. You'll be provided with access to resources through a Gmail account. I'm going to try to set those up, although I'm running into some issues in setting those up on my own, so I may need to reach out and ask you to set one up for yourself. But I'm going to provide a link to a YouTube channel, private YouTube channel, that provides you access to those recordings. You also have a catalog of areas, goals, and objectives. So this catalog has over 1,000 objectives. Also has goals and areas as well. And I want to thank Leanne for helping me prepare this. And she's been doing some research to incorporate additional content in here. So, you're going to find through your research and through the process I'm walking you through that you're not going to have to invent goals and objectives. You actually already, your tribe and your department has probably already developed a lot of these, and it's a matter of just going and finding those and organizing those. But you also may, a lot of times I hear the tribes want to consider areas that they have not considered. They want to make sure that their ETEP is covering everything they possibly can or should be doing. So The additional information I'm providing is going to make sure you're considering areas that you may not have considered, at least the ones that I've worked on. And I mean, these are covering probably maybe 15 different areas that are not even all environmental. So there's other complementary areas that you may want to consider as well. That you also have access to the presentation materials and other resources through the Google Drive folder. I'm going to work with you to provide an email address, but I may need to coordinate that with you, and then instructions for how to use all these things will be emailed. Also, for those who are participating in this, who are participating in the full course or register for the full course, you are welcome to share all these resources, the videos, all these things with other staff within the same organizational unit. So I ask that you do not, because this is taking me time and money to develop, and I ask that you do not share this information outside of your organization. But all of your staff can and should have access to this. So I think it's important for them to understand where all this comes from, because they may be working on these documents themselves. I hope they will be. And then there's going to be ongoing assignments and reminders that you'll be emailed throughout the session, or throughout the training series as well, so to keep you on top of the assignments. But really completing the assignments on time, I really encourage you to complete the assignments on time to maximize the value of this course. I believe that if you do participate in all these modules as they progress and utilize the resources I provide, and while completing the assignments within the requested time, that you will draft an ETEP that is highly functional in this highly functional format within 3 months or sooner. This also applies to those who have already completed an ETEP but want to convert it to the Prosper Sustainably format, where within 3 months you could completely transfer your ETEP into this format. You may find that based on how you prepared it before, you may need to gather additional information to make this as functional and helpful and useful as it possibly can. And that's what this is about. It's really maximizing the ETEP process, like making it where this would be something that you would do after you learn this process and you go through it. You would have done it even if the EPA didn't require it. So just as a reminder, the two reminders: one, if you are registered in the full course and you do miss one of the modules, you will have access to it on demand, and I'm going to follow up with a 15 to 30 minute. I can follow up with a 15 to 30 minute phone call after you watch the video, which will be available within 2 days. So I'm going to encourage you to make sure you stay on top of it. Make sure you do watch it as soon as possible. And if you need to ask me questions, schedule that 15 to 30 minute phone call so I can answer any of those. Missing a webinar here and there is not going to be a big deal, so long as you are watching the videos shortly afterwards. And then just as another reminder, these resources, these videos are only going to be available to the full course registrants and past clients. There is going to be something that I'm going to send out that has the available resources that I found on the internet, including the resources I provided in the past as well. So everybody that's here today is going to receive an email that has a useful document with all the available resources that I know of available on the internet. All right, so I'm going to keep this section as brief as possible because I have covered a lot of this in past webinars and presentations, and it does overlap a lot of what the EPA has been communicating. I think through the process that I've been going through and kind of working with clients and trying to reach out to the EPA, I hope that I have helped tribes in making the EPA be on board with some of these things as well. I believe I've been effective in that, just to clarify it for everybody. But as I mentioned, I'm going to be providing a document to all attendees that provides links to all the past resources, the videos, the presentations, resources that I have either prepared myself and will make that are available on my website, or I've found online that the EPA has provided, or even other tribes as well have provided. Okay, so I just want to, as a reminder, if you have any questions throughout, make sure you're utilizing the questions And let me just see, I accidentally closed the questions thing. Let me put that back. Okay, so if you have any questions, those will pop up. If you have something that you really need to ask on live audio, then you can raise your hand as well, and those things should be on your dashboard. All right, so just a little bit of background and context for this whole, the ETEP. So if this is all very new to you, you may be wondering even what an ETEP is. So that is an EPA-Tribal Environmental Plan, and that will become more clear as we go throughout all of this. This really stemmed from an Office of Inspector General audit determination done back in 2008, where the Office of the OIG determined that tribes don't have plans with goals for building environmental capacity, and where they do have plans, the progress toward meeting their goals is not being tracked. And it's really unclear how GAP is actually helping tribes meet their environmental program goals. So one of the recommendations was that there's no framework that's been provided by the EPA, but the tribes really need to have these goals and to have a system for tracking their progress toward meeting their goals. So really the ETEP is supposed to be like a strategic planning and management system, which I've done my best to make that a reality. Following this determination, the GAP guidance was developed by headquarters, and there was some back and forth, some comments provided by tribes, and the final was released in May of 2013. The GAP guidance itself provides the purpose, goals, and requirements. It's a fairly lengthy document, so this is a summary of it. And again, being in your position, and knowing, I think the GAP guidance is probably 60 to 80 pages or so. I can't remember the exact length, but being in your position is something. It's hard to sit down and read through a document like this. And I've had the luxury of being able to review it again and again and again. So I feel like I've developed an in-depth understanding of it, which really I think only comes with going through it over and over again, and even going through it in the context of trying to develop the best approach for preparing an ETEP. ETEPs are being developed and implemented, are supposed to be developed and implemented by the regions and the tribes. So the regions are supposed to provide kind of the guidance, and they're providing some of the framework for it, but the headquarters is supposed to be available to provide technical assistance to the regions and even to the tribes as well upon request. And so many of you probably been engaging with the EPA in this as well, and been receiving documents from them, maybe your inventory of regulated entities, and we'll get into more about what that is in a moment. Okay, so just kind of going to run through these pretty quickly. The purpose and goals of the ETEP are to define the mutual roles and responsibilities for environmental program implementation for both the tribes and the EPA. It's to establish this joint planning process to address the tribe's environmental priorities. It will also consider the federal priorities, but really to make sure that these programs, the federal environmental statutory programs, are being fully implemented. So to a certain extent, the EPA wants to make sure that the tribe's priorities are going to somewhat align, or at least cover the federal programs or priorities where those particular priorities are something that the tribe is having to deal with. The EPA also, the purpose of this process is also to identify the tribe's plans to manage authorized environmental programs, and these are the federal to assume authority, delegation, perhaps TAS, treatment as a state, under the federal statutory environmental programs, such as the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act. The purpose is also to identify the need for assistance and resources, so the EPA knows where it can provide that assistance and resources, and some of that may be funding resources. The ETEP should establish intermediate and long-term goals that guide both the tribe and the EPA, and really, that's straight from the OIG determination, also making sure that GAP progress is being measured against those long-term goals. So The tribe should, the tribe's long-term goals, which are going to a certain extent, overlap the GAP's kind of goals and work plans, and making sure that this GAP progress is showing progress toward meeting those goals, and ensuring that there is a linkage between these tasks under your GAP work plans and the long-term goals. So just a few more. The purpose of the GAP guidance, the ETEPs under GAP guidance, is to improve this alignment. I feel like that's kind of restated. Better position tribes in the EPA to build tribal environmental program capacity through the GAP program, but as it also relates to other environmental programs as well. It should be a streamlined approach for a long-term planning tool that can be modified as needed. And that's really where, I made the extra effort to make this something that can be modified. It's streamlined, it's adaptable, it's really a tool rather than in a system rather than just a plan. Intended to be a living, usable document for both the tribes and the EPA, primarily for the tribes, for planning and guiding work on an ongoing basis. And your ETEP is really, it's a series of strategic planning documents, a strategic planning and management system. And the ETEP itself incorporates what I believe is a strategic work plan. So just some of the benefits that I see on my side that I've been focused on is just having a strategic planning management system for all of your staff to make sure that your programs are operating and being implemented as efficiently and effectively as possible. Make sure that you have everything in sight at all times, because it's easy to lose sight when you get overwhelmed. And when you get overwhelmed, you tend to focus on what seems to be most urgent. And what's most urgent isn't necessarily where you should be focusing your energy at all times. So this allows you to kind of evaluate when things come up, what you really, whether you should be shifting your attention or not. It really helps you kind of set those goals and create and maintain alignment with those efforts and goals. So this is kind of beyond the EPA requirements, beyond the GAP guidance. Being proactive rather than reactive. Avoid chasing funding opportunities that don't meet your highest needs, and I've been guilty of this in the past. I've been focused on getting money in the office rather than strategically pursuing money that is going to achieve my goals. And one thing about that too is when you have this plan in the system, you're in a better position to be able to secure that money that you need to achieve your goals. Otherwise, you may just kind of be bouncing around based on what money is actually available. And then evaluating your issues, opportunities, and activities in the proper context. I talked about developing your grant and work plan, your GAP and grant work plans, and even programmatic work plans. There may not be a grant work plan, but using your ETEP. And that protection against setbacks due to turnover. And I think it really does help retain staff, because it makes it more clear like what they're involved in. It makes it more clear. It makes them more invested because they see a process, they see a mission, they see a vision, they see it's all linked. They're more, they feel like they're able to have better input. They're better able to see the changes going on around them. So it makes them more invested. And then when staff does go, you actually have a blueprint that it's one of the first things you do when a new staff member comes in. You ask them to look at your ETEP to see what they should be working on. And then utilizing this as a communications tool to gain support from your leadership, from your staff, from other departments, partners, stakeholders, funders. They see where you're going. They see the logic and the flow behind it. They get invested in it because a lot of times these other stakeholders won't have their own plans. And to the extent that your plan overlaps their plan, they may want to incorporate their goals and objectives into your plan. And I think that's beneficial to you because then it helps everybody be on the same page. It leads to less kind of conflict down the road. All right, so here are the 4 requirements. I'm going to go through each of these in detail, but this is, I've underlined this one, the very first requirement, the identification of tribal environmental program priorities, including capacity building and program implementation goals. This is, I think, paraphrased from the GAP guidance. This is the meat and potatoes of the whole ETEP. The tribe's environmental program priorities, regardless of whether they fall under specific EPA programs or not, is really the meat of this plan. And this is where it's all going to flow from. This is where you're going to spend, I think you should spend 95% of your time is developing these, and then this is what you're going to be managing on an ongoing basis. There will be also consideration of the EPA program priorities and management requirements. This is something that the EPA is really going to be kind of driving, and you'll have to make sure you're considering, but it's not going to require as much effort on your behalf. The inventory of regulated entities is something that the EPA is going to provide or may have already provided to you initially, and you're just going to kind of review this and provide some feedback and make sure that that covers the scope of regulated entities that you want. We'll talk about more of that in a moment. And then the fourth kind of main component is this identification of mutual roles and responsibilities. So among the EPA and the tribe, who is going to do what? When are they going to do it by? How are they going to do it? But the EPA emphasizes that the GAP guidance and the EPA have emphasized over and over again that the development and format options are flexible. So, it really, they're not providing a template for you. So I've kind of, done that on my own, and this isn't the only way to approach it, but I'm working with multiple tribes on this, providing training, getting lots of feedback, discussing this and getting feedback from the EPA to a certain extent as well, typically through the clients that I've worked with. I believe that I've developed the most effective long-term approach for this, like the most effective system that's going to help you implement a strategic planning and management system for your program that's really going to help you take everything to the next level. So, but it does need whatever format you choose needs to address those 4 requirements. As the EPA mentioned, the length, level of detail, and format will vary. As you can see, I like a spreadsheet format, although I do provide Word format options as well. But there should be maximum flexibility into how these are developed. So for your time frame, this is something important to consider off the bat. The GAP guidance says no more than a 5-year time frame should be used. What I'm recommending, and I have received some feedback on, is that a 4-year ETEP may be best because it does align with the GAP grant funding cycles. And I found that really, I think 4 years at minimum, like, you already have the next year or so, probably the majority of it mapped out, regardless of whether you know it or not. And that's a process I'm going to walk you through. Is you're not starting from scratch. You have this information out there already. So your next year is probably at least 60% mapped out. And I'm going to help you kind of gather and organize that information and insert it into your ETEP. Year 2 is going to flow from that. So, but there may be some differences as well, and you may even have a certain extent of that mapped out, maybe 25 to 50%, maybe less, perhaps. Year 3 is going to really, be a bit fuzzier. It's going to flow. There's going to be a pattern. You're going to see lots of repeating activities, which is good. There's certain things you want to repeat, which makes developing your plan that much easier because you're, to a certain extent, copying and pasting what you've done the prior year, and you're just kind of modifying it to allow your program to evolve. And then year 4 doesn't, has kind of the next steps beyond that. Year 4 and 5, I mean, there definitely are major things that do change from year to year. I mean, you're going to be, let's say you're developing a plan, you're getting the funding to develop an integrated solid waste management plan. In year 1, year 2, you're developing the integrated solid waste management plan. In year 3, you're implementing that plan, which may involve conducting like a further feasibility study on opening a transfer station. And maybe you're pursuing funding for that. And then same year 4, you're constructing, or you're hoping to be constructing that transfer station. In year 5, there might be another concrete activity, but I mean, 4 years is a pretty good length of time, and it does align with those funding cycles as well. Although it won't always be aligned with it, because what I'm advocating is that you have a perpetual 4-year plan. You have a living and continuous plan that you're changing each year. So you're going to have those next objectives, those next steps, where you're going. And that's what makes preparing your work plans that much easier, because you know where you're going and you make adjustments. So you may have objectives in year 3, such as pursuing and getting funding for a transfer station, that you may not actually secure. So you're going to apply for it in 1 year, and then year 4, you're supposed to be constructing it with the funding you secured. Well, if you didn't secure that funding, then you're going to have to, in year 4, pursue that funding again if you decide you still want to, and then shift that to the next year. So each year you're going to, this is always going to be a 4-year plan. So each year you're going to kind of close out that year, archive the prior year, you're going to move some stuff forward, and it's going to have a trickle-down effect, and then you're going to add another year in the back end, and I'm going to walk you through that exact process. The ETEPs are supposed to be jointly reviewed with the EPA and the tribes annually as needed. My recommendation is, don't necessarily wait for the EPA to do this, like manage this yourself. You may choose to update it on an ongoing basis. You may choose to update it quarterly. Do it at least annually. And then submit that draft to the EPA and obtain and incorporate their feedback. But even without their feedback, it's still going to be a system that's going to be guiding your decision making and all your other processes. So I do want to show something that the EPA recently provided, and I'm going to drop this in as a handout as well. EPA Region 9 recently developed this workflow that kind of just shows the full process of what the ETEP looks like. And so this is available online at that link. It was presented at the January 2016 RTalk meeting. And I actually think this is pretty helpful. It summarizes this whole process pretty well. So this document kind of shows you where you're going. In the beginning of the process, this is really focuses on kind of the major EPA steps. What I'm focusing on, the majority of this is about kind of developing the draft tribal environmental plan. So as you can see, that's really kind of only one box right here. This box right here is let me just kind of make it a little bit larger. This right here, like I said, this is 95% of the process. This is the most important thing of the entire process. The other things are important. This shows kind of what the EPA is going to be doing as well. So they're going to be developing the regulated facilities inventory, providing you with a draft that you then provide feedback on. They're going to incorporate that into their list, and then they're going to do a memo. They're going to provide feedback on your plan. So this kind of just shows the 1,000 foot or 20,000 foot view of what the process looks like. But really, it's like this is the heart of it right here. This is what's going to make or break your plan. This is what's going to change it from being just something you're doing to get this done with to actually being something that you would have done even if the EPA didn't require it. So this is a helpful document. I believe this next page has kind of a sample workflow for the plan of like over the course of 9-month period. So you can take a look at this as well. And I think this is a helpful thing as well. And so that's available on that website, but I just dropped it and provided it to you as well so you could have that. All right, so the main element I just talked about was developing the tribal program priorities. And this is what the EPA, at least in Region 9, is calling the Tribal Environmental Plan. So all this isn't new. The whole ETEP thing isn't necessarily a new thing. It's, the tribes were supposed to prepare an environmental inventory. Now they're calling that a baseline needs assessment. They're supposed to prepare a tribal environmental plan. Now it's, really this first component of the ETEP process. So there's a possibility that you've done some of this before, but you most likely haven't done in the way that I'm proposing. But the main elements that are required in the Tribal Environmental Plan portion of it are a short description of each priority and what I'm calling a priority program area. So I believe that you have various programs that you're already considering, that you already have in your office. You probably have waste management, water resources, you have an air program, just various ones that are focused on media. You may have kind of a whole program focused on education outreach. So you have these programs, you have to operate them. So to a certain extent, they're all priorities and should be incorporated in your strategic plan. So I don't think this is a matter of just being like, oh, we have an open dump site out there that's a priority to get that cleaned up. I don't believe that that's effectively going to help you manage your whole department on an ongoing basis. It'll help you address what's a priority right now, but it's not going to help you on an ongoing basis. That's why I recommend approaching it this way. You're also supposed to have your tribes, the long-term environmental program goals that address or support the priority. So, for each, and the way I approach it, you have your priority program areas, and then you have a series of goals for each priority program areas. And these are higher level goals. I'm going to distinguish kind of goals and objectives in a moment or later in this module. But your GAP work plan must be aligned with your ETEP long-term goals. You have your intermediate program goals. So that's where you're going to have your flow that may not have been happening before, or most likely you didn't have the tribe didn't have explicit environmental goals. So when you develop your GAP work plans, you need to somehow show that they're actually flowing down from the goals themselves, which are just really going to be linked to the priority program areas, and I'll show you other ways how to link them as well. So then this is really, I think, if I talked about this priority one and the tribal environmental plan being the meat and potatoes of the full ETEP. So these intermediate program development milestones and objectives are the meat and potatoes of the TEP portion of it. So the tribal environmental plan, this is where you're going to have the bulk of what you're going to be developing. So it's going to flow down from the priority program areas and the goals, and you're just going to have a series of objectives over the course of 4 to 5 years that you're really going to be guiding your office. You're going to be updating those on an ongoing basis. So these are going to be accomplished within the ETEP timeframe, where the goals themselves may not be accomplished within that timeframe. They just, they may never be accomplished, and I'll show you kind of why. You always want to pursue your goals, they just may not be accomplished. So then you have your tribe's plans to manage authorized environmental programs. I'll talk about more of that in a moment, but it's really your plans to assume authorities to manage the EPA statutory environmental programs. And I already talked about examples of those. You need to incorporate whatever assistance you may need to achieve your goals and milestones. So how I've been addressing is that you just incorporate those as objectives. If you need training, then you incorporate, or technical assistance, and you incorporate that as an objective to pursue that. So I don't think it makes sense to list those separately. You may have a separate document that maybe identifies specific training, technical assistance, and funding opportunities, but I think it's more important to keep in mind what training, technical assistance, and funding you may need, like surrounding an objective or on a particular topic, rather than what's available at the time, because you may need something that's not available at the moment. You want to keep track of that. All right, so I want you to take a brief moment right now to kind of consider your priority program areas. And this is where I asked you to have a notepad or something on the side and just write these things down, because this is part of the process. So I want you to write down your existing programs that are managed by your department right now. So you may have an environmental program. I mentioned you may have an air resources one. You may have a waste management. You may have water resources or just water quality. Those things may be separated. You may have a distinct program focused on climate change. You may have natural resources. Also write down needed programs that may be managed by your department as well. So, some of those things you may not be managing right now. You may not have a climate change program that you want to develop. You may not have an indoor air quality program, but you want to develop one as a distinct program. You may, your department may be most appropriate to develop a cultural resources program. So it can be environmental or non-environmental, but take some time and write down your existing programs. And here are some examples. I mentioned some as well. So you just, you can consider your water resources. You may have separate one for water quality and water resources. Your air resources, the climate change may be part of your air resources program, or maybe a separate program. Again, indoor air resources, indoor air quality may be under an overarching air resources or separate. So these are some ideas right now. So hopefully you've been writing those down as I've been talking. I'm not going to pause too long. I'm going to keep this all moving along just to kind of make sure we're going to be ending on time. But you also want to be considering kind of program areas that you may not frequently think of. So sustainability might be a new one to you, where you're kind of thinking about sustainability efforts, the ones that may focus on cost savings or things that focus on green buildings or operations. that may be a separate program that maybe involve working with commercial operations or other departments to help them green their operations as well. You may have a pesticides program, you may have a landscaping or public works program. So at the very bottom, you kind of see cultural resources, emergency response, land use. Those may be things you oversee. I think it's important to actually have a kind of a priority program area that focuses on general administrative and financial things. So you have a home or a container to put those goals and objectives. And even though you may not consider it a separate program right now, and it does kind of overlap all of them, but I'll kind of show you why. And that's been pretty successful. Okay, so I'm going to very briefly go through the plans to manage authorized environmental programs. So you have various options for this, for having things managed for the tribe. Federal environmental programs managed within the tribal trust land or the tribal jurisdiction. There may be EPA direct implementation. If you have not assumed authority for these statutory programs, then this is what's occurring. The EPA is retaining responsibility for administering the federal environmental laws, and I told you already what those laws are. Tribal participation in these is optional, so you may be participating in consultation, review, commenting on actions. You may participate in EPA inspections, do some community education outreach. So this is kind of the informal optional option for this. Another option is delegation, where the EPA, the tribe assumes EPA authority to administer the federal environmental laws. This is still subject to EPA. Well, it's subject to EPA approval, and the requirements may be similar to the treatment as a state requirements, but they're not the same. So with delegation, the EPA still maintains that authority. They still have that authority. The tribe is just doing it on their behalf. So an example of this would be conducting inspections. I know NAPEC, I believe, is conducting inspections for some tribes for their underground storage tanks. Excuse me. So they're assuming an EPA authority. EPA still, has that authority, and somebody else is just doing it on their behalf. Tribal direct implementation is the TAS, the treatment as a state or treatment in a similar manner as a state authority, where the tribe directly administers federal environmental laws. So gaining TAS is subject to EPA approval, but in this case, the tribe actually assumes that authority. So the EPA is no longer responsible. They're not just delegating the authority. The tribe itself has the authority directly under the Clean Air Act or Clean Water Act, or wherever there is a TS authority that the tribe is eligible to assume, that the tribe is now assuming that authority. And some more resources that I provide in the context of the Clean Air Act New Source Review stuff that ETEP's provided. And there, man, you can learn a little bit more about those distinctions. And so here really are the environmental programs that we're talking about where authorities can be assumed or managed. These are all the federal environmental statutes, all the acronyms for those. And here are the various responsibilities that you could assume of some form of authority. And like I mentioned, this is not just TAS, this may be delegation. And so in this case, this list is limited. There are many of these are TS authorities. If this is something that applies to you, this is something you really should be discussing your options with your EPA project officer. But you may be at a point where you are considering or have already assumed TAS for developing your own water quality standards and receiving notifications. Same thing with ambient air quality standards. You may be in the process of actually developing water quality standards that will then apply. And there's there's lots of other authorities that can be assumed, but this is going to be a conversation. This is a process that can sometimes take a couple of years, but this is something you'll want to discuss with the EPA. So just I'm going to kind of move through this activity right now. I'm going to send a follow-up email to the series participants on these activities, but just to consider your plans to manage authorized environmental programs. Do any of these apply to you? Which federal environmental programs will the tribe pursue authority to manage within the next 4 to 5 years. So looking through these and then, referring to other resources, you want to, the EPA wants to know these. Like, this is actually one of the primary goals of the ETEP for the EPA, is to identify where the tribe may be assuming or managing these things. So this kind of shows where the EPA's responsibilities are and where they may change. And so the EPA really wants to see these within the plan itself, and and I'll walk you through the process of incorporating these into the plan. But you first need to know whether you're going to be pursuing those, and I'll show you how to incorporate these. And it's not a rigorous process. You're including these as objectives to pursue these authorities. All right. So in doing the first priority, you want to discuss with the EPA connections between these priorities and federal environmental programs. Some of that comes through that process of discussing what authorities you may assume. You also want to discuss what assistance can they provide that will help the tribe. I think in considering the tribe's programs and priorities, I recommend, in the GAP guidance, it does state that the tribe can include non-federal environmental / EPA programs in ETEP. So you can include other environmental programs. You can even include non-environmental programs if they're within, the scope of what you want to incorporate. And I'm going to talk about the scope, and actually we're going to get to that shortly. The EPA should review and provide feedback on where they can and cannot provide assistance. In my experience, they have done this. They'll review your plan and provide some feedback, where they can provide assistance and ask you to, recommend some changes. And they should also identify where they can't provide assistance. So, if they're not doing that, this is very important, because this ETEP is supposed to help the tribe and the EPA make funding decisions. So the EPA is trying to identify what the tribe may need funding for, and the tribe itself needs to identify, what it may need to seek funding for, and what's eligible for GAP funding and what's not eligible for GAP funding. Because if something's not eligible for GAP funding, then that may change it, as a viable objective. If you have a particular objective to do something like developing a habitat conservation plan, and that's part of your plan, and you thought it was GAP funded, which it's not. But if you didn't know that and you submitted the EPA, and when you were going under the assumption that you could get that funded by the EPA, and it's in year 3 of your plan, then you may be at year 3 or year 2, and then you find out that it can't be funded by GAP. So that may have changed whether what year you're going to do it in, whether it's a priority or not. So hopefully that's kind of clear. Although if you are pursuing a habitat conservation plan, then that's something you can pursue under a tribal wildlife grant. All right, so I'm not going to spend too much time on, I know I keep saying that, and I probably do spend a lot of time in each one of these, but I'm going to go into more details on these in later modules, and kind of show examples of these things. But number 2 is really the EPA is going to review and document the tribal status, intentions, and activities with respect to tribal environmental programs. This relates to those federal statutory programs that are the EPA's responsibilities by default. So the EPA is going to provide you a list or should be providing you a list, it may have already, of these various areas of responsibility and kind of what the status is with respect to each one. So they're supposed to, according to the GAP guidance, supposed to review the program implementation activities for these things as well. And I'm not sure exactly how that's going to take place exactly. I haven't, seen, aside from maybe the feedback they're helping to incorporate into your plan, I didn't see anything distinct the EPA was doing to fulfill kind of those responsibilities or incorporating that into the plan. Just more, I've just seen the identification, the list and the identification. But this is supposed to be done by the regions in coordinations with the tribe and headquarters. And then I'm recommending that you request headquarter involvement and support as needed if you are running into any conflicts or issues with the regions, but hopefully that's not the case. The inventory of regulated entities is where that component is where the EPA is going to provide you that list of known regulated entities. They actually have a database they're going to have a database. They're going to look in their database and provide you with that list. And then, you can look it up right now using this link. This should be, if the EPA hasn't done this, you can include this in your TEP or your ETEP strategic work plan as an objective, just with the EPA as having the responsibility rather than the tribe. And then as a tribe, you're supposed to review and update this with any additional regulated entities that you want to be included or that they've missed. And then, updating that can be included as an objective. The EPA is going to focus on regulated entities within tribal jurisdiction that they know about. So obviously identifying any entities that should be on there that aren't within tribal jurisdiction. You may choose to go beyond that. So there may be entities that are not covered by federal environmental statutes, but which have environmental implications that you think should be incorporated into this inventory. So that could be septic tanks or household wells. It also could include off-reservation facilities. So if there are facilities that are adjacent to the reservation that that you are concerned about or want to keep track of, then you can ask them to incorporate those into the inventory as well. And then this should be updated as appropriate as operation status changes as new facilities are developed. And really the presence of these facilities determines which federal environmental statutes are going to be applicable and relevant and should be incorporated into your plan. The mutual roles and responsibilities are going to define the activities to be conducted by the tribe and the EPA. So this is going to show what the tribe's going to do to support the EPA's direct implementation of the federal environmental programs, and what the EPA is going to do to support tribal development and implementation of the priorities they have identified. The EPA will ultimately determine what assistance they're going to provide, whether it's training, technical assistance, funding, so on and so forth. And hopefully the conversation's happening in the process of this plan. So tribes are going to, and then also what the tribes are going to do either to apply for program approval or delegation, or what capacities are going to build or partner with the EPA to implement the federal environmental programs. And then these should be determined through discussion between the EPA and tribal staff. And I think that once these activities are determined, they should be incorporated into the ETEP as objectives. And I'm going to show you how to do that. And with the appropriate role for the EPA or tribe respectively, and the actual objective may involve both. So as you're going through this, you're also supposed to be incorporating your environmental program capacity. You're establishing the environmental program capacity indicators that are going to be established, plus the general timeline for establishing these. So I think it's good to keep track of your capacity indicators. You're really incorporating, what I'm suggesting is you incorporate these capacity indicators as objectives, and you incorporate the capacity indicator numbers from the guidance as well to link with each objective as applicable, and I'm going to walk you through that process. And then you're going to have a role for each objective and milestone, whether it's a tribe or the EPA, or maybe it's, you may want to be more detailed with the roles if you want. But some additional requirements, the ETEP should show completion dates, which will allow progress to be measured. I mentioned the joint evaluation, which should include EPA's activities, the alignment of the work plans with the ETEP, that it's supposed to be a living document and supposed to revise as needed, and the support of senior officials of the tribe and the EPA, and I'm going to talk more about this in later modules. So I provided a cheat sheet on these things that really just very briefly summarize what these requirements are. I'll just show you that real quick. I've provided this in some of the past workshops that I've done, although I've made a few changes, but just kind of a one-page or even half-page sheet that just summarizes these requirements and provides a little bit of kind of suggestions on these things as well. And that resource will be available to the full course trainees. All right. So now we're getting to, now we're going to start developing the ETEP. So I need to provide that background context so that you understood where this all comes from, and hopefully you found that valuable. And I provided some of these steps in the past, but there's there's really, I'm going in more depth. There's no more new ones, and I'm actually walking you through the process rather than just kind of skimming through the process. And this is the process that I use when I work with the tribe. So the first thing to do is determine the initial scope of your ETEP and strategic plan. So your scope is really going to be the priority program areas that you're going to ultimately select. And I asked you a moment ago to kind of consider what your priority program areas are. And then under that umbrella of priority program areas, you're going to have the long-term goals and objectives that are going to be relevant to each priority program area. So you're going to have your priority program area, or you're going to have your series of priority program areas. Each priority program area is going to have a couple goals, and then it's going to have a series of objectives that you're going to strive to accomplish over the next 4 years. The ETEP must include all tribal activities and entities that are regulated by the EPA. So if you have activities and entities within tribal jurisdiction that are subject to some specific federal environmental statutory program, then those should be incorporated into the ETEP. And some of those things may fall outside of your department, so you have to kind of consider, how to balance that. So you need to consider which programs and departments are you going to include. My recommendation is to cover all programs kind of have one main department. Let me see. So you have kind of one primary department. You may have your tribal EPA, and that tribal EPA has environmental programs. You may have a tribal and environmental and cultural resources department. I think the entire scope of that department should be incorporated into this plan. You may need to go beyond that if there are some activities outside the scope of your department that are going to be regulated by the EPA. You need to cover those somehow, and you can just show that those are separate roles and responsibilities internally. But I think that the full scope of your department should be covered. All the programs, including the non-environmental programs, should be covered. And then the scope itself, right now, this is going to be one of the assignments that I'm going to follow up on. But as you're kind of going through the process of gathering information and developing your ETEP, the scope itself may change and evolve as you progress. But you're going to have a good sense of what should already be included. Okay, so I'm going to follow up with an assignment to that'll be one of the follow-up assignments as well. So the next step is going to be select the core ETEP development team, and also to identify your stakeholders. It's kind of two separate processes. So initially off the bat, you definitely want to involve the director or manager for the relevant department. And also you're going to want to involve very early on the lead for every program. So if you have a water resources program specialist or manager, whoever is kind of overseeing the water resources program, maybe the waste management program, maybe the air resources program. So kind of, maybe there's an education outreach, somebody overseeing those efforts. So there should be kind of a core ETEP development team that should be involved from the start. My recommendation is to only have one person prepare the initial draft. So ideally, this is the department head. I can't really think of, being a former director myself, I know it's easy to get pulled in lots of different directions, but I really can't think of any more important thing you should be doing. As a director, the things I'm going to walk you through are really the things you should be doing as a director. Like this is your strategizing. This is the definition of directing and managing. This should come down from you. You're providing an initial draft. This draft is not set in stone. You're going to get feedback from everybody, but you kind of need to have one person that's going to manage this whole process, and it's going to coordinate everybody else. And so you're going to do that by seeking your input from your program leads, other staff, leadership, and stakeholders. Once you complete that first draft, you may, for people who are substantially involved in a particular program, or who, you may have your program leads actually develop portions of your initial draft, but I think you don't really want to start involving too many other people until you have this first completed draft, because you don't want your ETEP to start going in directions that it really can't and shouldn't go. So one thing that I find is if I start a conversation too soon with stakeholders that don't have as much of awareness of what environmental responsibilities and capabilities of the tribe can and should be, then they start saying, well, we should be, I'm trying to think of a good example of like, an idea. We should put up solar everywhere. That should be our goal, which is actually a pretty good goal. We should be, I don't know. So I'll come up with an example of that later. Just, they may start going off in the wrong direction or just like a direction that it's good to get that feedback, but wait, you know, have them provide that feedback in the context of what you already know that you're pursuing. So there's certain things you're already working on. You can only deviate so far from that, at least within the next few years. So you will definitely want to involve your entire department staff eventually. And then you are going to want to notify and eventually involve your executive committee or tribal council, if you have a committee for your departments, so maybe you have an environmental committee, your tribal administrator, or maybe you have some type of executive that's overseeing you. So you want to notify them that you're doing this off the bat. You want them to know about this right away, and if they may insist on being involved, and it's definitely important to give them that opportunity early on. But I think it's notify them, let them know the process you're going through, and let them know that you're going to be preparing this initial draft and then coming back to them getting feedback. So that would be the ideal process here. Also consider involving other executives from other, there might be a CFO, there might be a general manager, then just other department, might be from other might be from commercial operations. There might be other partners, other departments. So maybe a facilities department, utilities, planning. There might be commercial departments, other government departments, a cultural department, and other stakeholders as well. So you want to consider involving those and just how you're going to approach those. And it's really the same process. You're going to draft the plan. You'll notify them what you're working on. And then when you have the draft, you'll go and meet with them and seek their feedback. So you may distribute the plan and request feedback, although I do find it's much more effective to actually sit down with them, because when you submit this to people, unless you can keep it as concise as possible, which I'll show you how to do, or just people tend to not to always respond to something you send to them. You do kind of sit down with them, but I'll show you some methods to do that. So then the next step is going to be your information gathering and baseline needs assessments, and this is something that you're going to get started on today. So through this process, you're going to be identifying possible priority program areas, long-term goals, and intermediate milestones / objectives. As I mentioned, most of this information should already exist. You are just finding and organizing it. So this developing the first year of the ETEP is actually, it's not that challenging. You already have work plans for upcoming years that you've already drafted a lot of times. I mean, you should already have your fiscal year 2016 and 17 GAP work plan that you've drafted and submitted to the EPA. You should have your I believe your Clean Water Act 106 and maybe even 319 ones already drafted as well. Your Clean Air Act 103 may be drafted as well. So you have a lot of this information is already out there, and then you may have management plans that have series of goals and objectives. They may have some timelines for things. There may be other strategic planning documents, assessments. So I'm going to go through where you're going to get this information from, but you're not starting from scratch at all. You're going out there, you're finding the information, you're organizing it. Okay, so here's where you're going to go to get that information. There's going to be a series of internal information sources where you're going to gather it from. So you're going to gather, review, and extract information from internal documents and other information sources, including but not limited to, you may have your tribal environmental plans, former tribal environmental plans, formal tribal environmental agreements, environmental inventories, strategic plans and policies. You definitely want to look at your GAP. You definitely want to look at your grant documents. So you're going to have your narratives, your work plans, especially your narratives and your work plans, because those are going to include usually goals and objectives and activities. I think progress reports can be helpful to look at as well to make sure you're aware of where you're at, maybe what you've been doing in the past, especially if you're new to the department. It's good to go back and look at those. I think you should go back at least 2 years and look at these, because one thing too, when you go back 2 years, you may identify things that you're supposed to do that you haven't done yet, but that you may still want to do, and you want to incorporate those into the plan. You also want to look at the ones, you look at your current one, your current work plans, whether the grant work plans or not, and then look at your future ones as well. So you may have already drafted these, and you want to incorporate those things you've already drafted into the plan, because those are going to be your goals and objectives. It's already what you are committing to doing. You've submitted that work plan to the EPA, so you don't have a lot of opportunity to change those things right now. Although if you do need to make major changes, it's good to identify that as soon as possible and let the EPA know while you're still in the process of negotiating your GAP and other grant work plans. You also want to consider your relevant, recent, pending, and unsuccessful grant proposals, because you may pursue these grant opportunities and funding opportunities again, and those contain goals and objectives that you want to pursue. So I've talked about not just your grant ones, but your program. If you have narrative, like for non-grant programs, you may not actually have work plans and budgets. You may not have reports, but if you do, you want to review those. Any plans, especially resource management plans, assessments, feasibility studies, surveys, and related reports. I think it's good to obtain and review plans from other departments where there may be overlap with the environmental department, or where it may overlap with the scope of the plan. I think you also want to identify and review your environmental codes, regulations, resolutions, and compliance documents. There may be gaps. You may actually identify that you have environmental codes that you didn't even know existed, and those need to be updated. If there are any general tribal strategy and land use documents, you want to go through these to identify what the tribe's overarching goals and objectives are, which may be relevant to you and you may not be aware of. And then trying to interview and discuss and gain information from staff, leadership, and other internal stakeholders as well. They may have critical information. I mean, you definitely want to review and record your internal staff knowledge. So going to your staff members, talking about your programs as well. And some of these last 2 points may occur after you've developed a draft based on the documents that you've reviewed and incorporated into your draft. So I actually have provided a document info tracking template, and let me just pull that up real quick. So there's a lot of documents, information to keep track of. I provided a sample. I think it's important to keep track of these things, so that's one of the assignments is going to be to begin gathering these documents and to incorporate the documents you've requested or received and reviewed on here. This allows you to keep track of all those things. When I'm working with a tribe, I may have where it's possibly 15 to 20 to even 30 or 40 long, just so this makes sure that I know what document, what area it possibly applies to, what's the status, whether I received it, requested it, reviewed it, when I requested it, keep track of that, when I expect it. If I don't actually have it, or if I'm not putting these all in one location, where is it located, so I can go back and retrieve it as needed. And just to note that these are our examples as well. So that will be uploaded. And also I've prepared, I have requested this information from tribes. I'm working with them as well, so I'll provide a template just of my request of what I'm requesting, what you're looking at as well. So this goes a little bit beyond what I just showed in this. Oh, so there's also external information gathering as well. So you want to gather, review, and extract information from all relevant external documents. I think an important thing to do is going to be reviewing the May 2013 GAP guidance, Appendix 1. You want to record and relevant capacity indicators with their numbers and the kind of areas that apply to you. It can be helpful to go through environmental grant funding opportunities that you may be interested in and see what activities are eligible for funding there, and you may want to incorporate those as objectives under your plan. There may be environmental agency or other agency guidance documents that you want to review and incorporate goals and objectives from, and interviewing agency representatives and other external stakeholders. So, and I have a knowledge base from past projects, experience, and ideas, and the catalog that I'm provide you access to is going to provide a lot of objectives, priority program areas, objectives, and goals that you can review. So I just showed you the information tracking template and the sample email. So that's going to be one of the assignments that I'm going to follow up on. Is going to be to download the document information tracking templates, request and gather all relevant information documents, and utilizing these previous slides and that email template I showed you, and then tracking that info within that document, and gathering as many of these documents as possible for the next module, which will probably be in 2 weeks. It may be next week, but I'm probably going to try to do it in 2 weeks out from now. And then these are going to be used to identify your program areas, goals, and objectives. So I want you to have these before the next module, so you can go through these during the module and know what you're looking at. And I may actually, if you're willing to share some of these with me in the meantime, then I actually would be willing to use some of yours during the webinar and show you how I would go through those and extract out the relevant information. So as I mentioned, I'm going to have you also go through the gap guidance capacity indicators, Appendix 1. So this is a very valuable source for priority program areas and objectives, and it's going to make the EPA happy because these are the objectives they want to see you pursuing. So the program areas are going to be the gap program areas are going to be can be aligned with your ETEP priority program areas. Let me open this real quick, and then actually let me drop this in the as a downloadable. So I'm just dropping Appendix 1 into the handout so you can download it right now. So let's just scroll down to, so these guys right here. So right here, administrative capacity. So you could have administrative and financial, ambient and indoor air quality program. That could be a priority program area. Water quality could be a priority program area. So they don't have to be exact, and they can be broken up too. So in this one, it's solid waste, hazardous waste, underground storage tanks. This could be all one priority program area for you, or it could be 3 separate ones. So you're going to review that to identify possible priority program areas. As I mentioned, this one can be split into multiple ones. The capacity indicators themselves can be incorporated into your ETEP, especially the Tribal Environmental Plan portion of it, as your objectives and milestones. So one example is, so you go in here, you go down to C310, so it's on page 14. Sorry if this is making you dizzy. I'm trying to move fast because I am almost out of time. So right here you'll see, so C314, this is developing a climate change, tribe has developed a climate change vulnerability risk assessment. You can change this language to say, develop a climate change vulnerability / risk assessment as an objective, and then you want to make note of the capacity indicator number. So you'll be getting objectives straight from this document. And make sure you are making note of this. So the assignment for before the next module, which I will send a follow-up email on, is to review this and identify, you can have this online, and as you identify different ones that you want to pursue, let's say you do want to pursue this one, make note of it, highlight it. Let's say you want an air quality program or an air quality program area, you can highlight that as well. So review this, highlight this as possible objectives for now, and then as you're developing your ETEP, you can come back and extract this information and enter it straight to the document later. But it also helps you familiarize yourself with what possible program areas and objectives you could be pursuing, which I think is an important first step. So as I mentioned, you're noting the possible program areas such as water quality program or solid waste, and then you're noting and identifying possible intermediate objectives, which are the specific capacity indicators. And one example is D.3.7, which is the tribe has established water efficiency policies, and you would just rewrite that as an objective, saying that you will establish those. All right, so these next 3, I just want to, I'm actually going to save these for next time. Well, I'll breeze through them very quickly, but just so you know what you're looking at. So your priority program areas, we already discussed those. These are the various programs that you may be pursuing, and you would want to go beyond the environmental ones. Your long-term goals are going to flow down from each program area. This is going to be your overarching goals. So as I mentioned, they're long-term goals. These should be broad, general, high-level goals. I'll come back to these and talk about these in more detail in the next module. And then there'll be objectives that you're going to pursue that to accomplish those long-term goals. And again, these are going to be organized by a priority program area, but must be aligned with those goals. So your goals versus your objectives. Your goals are kind of a significant aim or desired result, can be kind of more general and ambitious, but it's more specific than, say, your mission or vision. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. It doesn't need to be achievable within a specific time frame. So an overall goal might be to eliminate and reduce environmental impacts. I guess that's why this is a high-level general goal, may not be accomplishable within the specified time frame, but it's still worth pursuing. A program-specific goal might be to eliminate and reduce water pollution. Again, eliminating water pollution may not actually be an achievable goal depending on how you define water pollution, but it's still a worthwhile program area goal, and you'd want a series of objectives to pursue that. So your objectives are what's going to be done to achieve that goal, and accomplishing your objectives is going to represent progress. It's going to be your major steps and activities, or essentially sub-goals. The smaller steps, you may have heard the SMART acronym. I'm applying to objectives in this case. And I mentioned developed by specific program area. An example here might be developing a resources management plan. So under your goal to eliminate water pollution, you may be developing a water quality management plan, or you may, something of that nature, or even completing a restoration may help eliminate water pollution. All right, so as an activity, I provided some context. It's important that you understand the difference between the program areas, the priority program areas, long-term goals, and objectives. So what I'm asking is that you prepare and submit by email 2 to 3 examples of this flow. So here's an example. So you have your priority program area, your PPA, might be waste management. Your goal might be eliminate and prevent illegal dumping throughout the reservation, which is a long-term goal. And your objective, so 2 objectives might be, one might be to identify, pursue, and secure funding to clean up and close this dump site. Objective number 2, which may be done in a separate year or in the same year, might be to developing a cleanup and closure plan for that illegal dump site. All right, so here are the next steps for proceeding. So completing the assignments, I'm going to send you an email on those. I'm also, I'm going to send an email with the materials as well and set you all up with those things. But determining your core team and identifying your stakeholders, determining the scope of your ETEP, doing your information gathering, reviewing GAP Guidance Appendix 1, and submitting the 2 to 3 examples of your program areas, your priority program area to goal to objectives flow. Also, make sure, consider whether you want to pursue any of the authorities, EPA authorities as well. That's important kind of consideration right now. I had that as one of the activities. Also responding to the doodle poll for scheduling the next module, and then working with me to kind of arrange your Gmail access to YouTube resources. And so I'm about to complete the webinar. I ask that you, I'm going to close this out, and I ask that you complete the survey to help me improve. I'm also going to open it up too if anybody has any questions. I'm going to actually turn on the audio for everybody as well, and see if there's any questions. But also, if you are interested in participating in the course, in the full course, please send me an email, and I can get you registered and let you know what the requirements are for that. But I hope even if you're not going to be participating, that this time has been well spent for you. And for those that are moving on, I look forward to working with you on an ongoing basis. So let's see, I'm going to unmute. I'm trying to unmute people. Does anybody have any questions? Let's see, we have a question. Would you need a water capacity building priority program area if you currently have a Clean Water Act 106 and 319 grants? So yes, you do need a water program. So you already do have a priority program area. It's just a matter of incorporating it into your plan. So in this case, you may choose to have a water quality program that includes your 106 and 319 programs. So you have both point and non-point source programs under it, or you may actually choose to have a separate non-point source and point source program. I like to include all water quality related activities together under the ETEP specific priority program area, doesn't mean you operate any differently. So, doing this ETEP doesn't really change your operations. All it does is allow you to keep track of it all and organize it all and keep everybody on the same page. So one thing you may choose to do is to, I'm slowly trying to unmute everybody. All you need to do is, I'm gonna have you raise your hand because I'm getting, let's see, I have everybody unmuted right now if you want to ask questions. So all you need to do in that case, so in some cases you may have a water resources program that's separate, so it focuses on water use, that you may want to keep that separate than maybe say water quality. I've done it where I've combined all water resources stuff in one, and I've done other ones where I've had water quality be separate from water resources, which just involve really kind of consumption and use and might involve things like water efficiency and so on and so forth. It may even include water utilities related stuff. Okay, we have some hammering going on. Do we have any other questions? All right, well, I appreciate everybody taking the time to participate in this webinar. I've just muted everybody again. If you have anything, you can type it in there. So thank you very much. And again, please complete the survey when I close out the webinar to help me improve.